Hi, I'm Gary White for Central Kentucky Television. I'm here with John Thompson, who is the Lebanon building official and building inspector and zoning official for the city of Lebanon. And we're going to talk about some of the different building and zoning issues for the city. I know last time we had you on, we were talking about the property maintenance committee and the ordinance that was impacted there. How's that going?
Well, pretty good. We've gotten, I think we started out with 13 original sites that we had problems with, and we're down to probably 4 sites that haven't been cleaned up. One of them because we can't find all the owners because of the person that actually owned it it was deceased and left to the family, and we just can't make contact with them. Another one, we have actually cleaned the property, but it's still, we can't make contact with the owner, and so we're still working on that issue. It's not to the point that we need to demo the house yet, and so we're just kind of waiting to see what happens there. A couple of more of the properties are just properties that are on the list that they actually maybe took, if we had a residence that needed to be something done with it, they actually tore it down, but now we're having a problem with them keeping the property clean. We've got that on 3 or 4 different properties. But for the most part, most of the properties that were our big issues are cleaned, and so it's going pretty well.
Now, as we speak, it's summer, and for a while there, we didn't really have to worry about much with mowing and such because we didn't have any rain.
Right.
But now we've been getting some rain and the grass is growing. So you're saying that there's some issues there as well, because part of your job is to make sure everybody maintains their property also,
right. And we've been pretty lenient, I guess, for the past couple of 3 months, just because it has been so dry. But now that it started raining, some of these properties, the Johnson grass and the weeds are thriving, and they're growing right on. And I'm just, I'd like to ask the people to, if your yard looks like it's a little taller than your neighbor, if you don't mind, go ahead and cut it, because I'll get the call pretty soon if you don't. So I'm starting to get several calls now that it's starting to grow. So just remember, really, that the ordinance says 8 inches tall. So if you have grass that's over 8 inches tall, you can go ahead and cut it.
So that is an official
rear yard as well as front yard. That's one issue that I've had this summer. Is I've had people that will mow their front yard and they'll not mow the rear yard for some reason. So that's kind of been an issue.
It's like throwing all your trash in the closet.
I guess.
Hoping that nobody sees it.
And it worked pretty well, because most of the time I drive by, I see the front yard and it looks okay, and then I get a call from the neighbor and they say, you need to contact my neighbor and have them mow their yard. And I'm like, I just saw that property yesterday, it looked good. And they said, well, did you look in the backyard? And I think, well, probably not. I didn't stop and just look at the rear yard. I saw the front yard and it looked okay, so I go back and sure enough, they've let the rear yard grow. So so just keep that in mind. So,
but there is an official ordinance that you are required to maintain your property grass to a certain level.
Right, and it's incorporated into our property maintenance code that we adopted.
Okay. How about trees and shrubbery? I know we've talked a little bit about that before, and like some people think that wildflowers can just grow however they want. Is that accurate?
Well, that's always an issue, because what I may consider to be a nuisance and a weed, it actually could be someone's flower. So if it's not causing a major problem and I'm not getting a lot of calls, I don't worry about those too much. One place when you mention trees that we get into a lot of discussion about is fence lines. I go to someone's house and I say, well, your fence line is really getting growed up and it needs to be cut. And they tell me, well, that's my screen, because go look through the fence and see what's going on the other side. So that's always a tough issue. All I can say on that is just keep it cut as well as you can. And as long as I don't get complaints, it's probably not going to be a problem. The only place that shrubbery and trees do become a problem are out next to the street, not only at intersections, but next to driveways. I have a lot of that where someone will plant a shrub close to the corner of their property, and it starts growing, and they don't think anything about it because a lot of times it'll be on the opposite side of their yard as their driveway. So when they back out, they can see up and down the street, no problem. Well, the neighbor, it's right beside their driveway, and they go to back out, and they can't see till they get out in the street. So just watch shrubs and trees out next to the street, and make sure that it's not causing a sight problem for anyone. And whenever we see some of those, we sometimes do go ahead, and if we deem it to be necessary, we'll go ahead and cut those. And sometimes we don't do as good a job as maybe the homeowner would, so it's best for them to do it if they care.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if somebody has some questions about whether, before they put something in, can they ask you you questions, or have you come out and kind of tell them?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I would much rather, if somebody's getting ready to build or say place a tree, I'd much rather them call me so I can say, well, that's, I think that will be fine. If I can't, if it's kind of borderline and I'm not sure and don't really want to make the call, we can get the property maintenance board together. We can talk to the planning commission and get a yay or nay on it if we have to. But it's always a lot easier for me if I can go to the property and say, at least know what's going on before we start, because it's a whole lot harder whenever something's already done and I get there and have to maybe make them move it or tear it down or whatever. Mm-hmm. Which, speaking of tear it down, makes me think of building permits. I get a lot of questions on that, and I also see a lot of buildings, maybe porches and stuff like that sometimes that are, a lot of times that stuff can get built, and I'm not sure, maybe if I haven't been down the street for a couple of 3 weeks, well, I go back and I look at a house and I think, did they get a permit for that? Is that new, or they just paint it or whatever? But so I don't get too worried about those issues unless I know it's a problem. But just while we're talking about it, I'd like to remind everyone to get a building permit, or at least call City Hall and ask if they need a building permit. And usually these storage buildings that are portable, they do require a building permit. Really? And then any addition that you do to an existing home, such as a porch or a room, they require permits. A lot of times decks, we don't worry too much about decks if it's not encroaching on the property line or whatever. I don't worry about decks too much, but and fences, we don't normally issue permits for those. So, but I would rather someone call me before they put up a fence, before they build a room or porch or anything like that, and let me know what's going on so we can decide if the setbacks are correct. And
sometimes even if they're not adding on to, but what if they're renovating a current structure that's inside, or fixing the
that's a good
windows,
question.
Do they need permits for that?
And that depends.
Okay.
If it's residential, if you're remodeling the inside of your home, the answer is no. The only way that we would get involved in residential is if you were adding something outside and taking up new space. When it comes to business or commercial, the answer could be yes, we would have to do a permit if you're changing the use of a building, such as if you had say a furniture store in the building. It's always been used for that, and then all of a sudden you decide it's going to be a restaurant.
We've had that.
Yeah, and we've had that. That does require permits. And most buildings, if you're going to change the facade of the building and you're doing some work on your entry door, we like to look at those, because a lot of the older buildings weren't necessarily to code. And with today's code, and especially the handicap portion of the code, we like to look at those entrances and make sure that they're okay for handicap as well as egress in case of an emergency. So most of the time business, we would issue a permit. Residential, if it's on the remodeling side, most time residential, we don't get involved.
And are there handicapped accessible requirements when you're renovating a resident? residential property as well? Or is that kind of...
Only if it's rental property.
Okay.
Whenever it's rental property, you get into a thing where you may not have to, say you're building a fourplex apartment building, you don't necessarily have to make any of the units handicap accessible, but you may have to make them easily adaptable to be handicapped. You know, you may not have to install pull bars, grab bars. You may not have to install the handicap commode or something like that, or put on lever handle faucets, but it has to be made to where, with the blocking in the wall and such, that you can go back and add that later.
Okay.
If it gets into bigger units, say let's say there's a building and you were going to have 20 units in that building, then you would have to make one of those units handicap accessible. It would have to be completely handicap accessible. So that's kind of the mark, is 1 in 20. Once you get to that point, you have to do that. And if you, and that would also, if you had a property and you were going to have 5 fourplexes on it, well, you'd have to go into one of those buildings and make one unit totally accessible.
Okay. But if you have questions about that, you can contact John Thompson. And what's your phone number?
The phone number to City Hall is 692-6272.
Okay, and you can ask for John Thompson. You can answer your questions there. We also want to reiterate that this is for the City of Lebanon, correct?
Right, for the City of Lebanon.
Do any of these go outside into the county?
No, the only thing that the city does, and that's, a lot of people think we do within the 3 air miles, but the 3 air mile rule is that if you take a piece of land and split it into 2, or ever how many portions you'd split it into, anytime you do a subdivision, then it would have to go before planning and zoning. That's only for the division. As far as what you're going to use the property for, we're not concerned with that. Our main thing is that all lots front a public maintained street or road, and in case it ever is annexed into the city, we're not ending up with a bunch of private roads that the city now is going to be asked to pave and that kind of thing. So so there is no zoning out in the county other than just for subdivisions.
Okay.
One other thing I would like to mention while we're talking about these issues is signs, yard sale signs in particular. You know, we've had a pretty good stretch where people will put up their yard signs and they will take them down off of the utility poles and stuff. Of course, our ordinance says that you can't do that, period. But we normally don't say anything about it, and we don't take them off the pole if it's a yard sale that's advertised for this weekend. If you put the sign up on, say, Wednesday, as long as it's gone Monday morning, we don't normally say anything about that. But if they're there Monday, well, if we see them, we'll start taking them down. We never have taken the address off of that sign yet and find anyone, but you know, that's always a possibility that we would do that. But I would just ask that if you put up a yard sale sign for a weekend, that you take it down once the sale is over.
So it's actually against the ordinance law to put something up onto a telephone pole,
right?
Whether it be like a reward for...
It's not necessarily... Well, I guess it is the city ordinance. You really can't advertise something that's not done on that property. If you're having a yard sale, really, you're not supposed to have a sign anywhere other than on the property that the yard sale is going to be conducted.
Okay, so that's allowed.
And that's the same way with business signs. If you have a business in town, you're allowed certain signs on your business and on the property, but not on the street corners and not on somebody else's building and that kind of thing. So. But when it comes to power poles, actually the utility companies ask that nobody put anything on their poles, so they could actually get involved in it as well. But we do have an ordinance that just says no signs on utility poles or trees or anything like that. But like I say, we don't worry about that too much, as long as somebody comes back and gets them, and don't just leave them there for the weather to tear them off the pole and end up on somebody's property and they have to pick it up and put it in the trash.
Right. Okay. Well, again, this has been some updates on the property maintenance report and also on zoning and planning for the City of Lebanon. I've been here with John Thompson, who is the zoning official.
Building inspector and zoning official.
Inspector, yeah. Right, for the City of Lebanon. Thank you very much. And again, if you have some questions about anything we talked about, or if what we talked about raised some other questions for you, you can contact John by calling City Hall in Lebanon.
Right, 692-6272.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This has been Gary White for Central Kentucky Television.